I am a cryo-electron microscopist, I guess, if it would call this. And yes, I was in love with these channels for many years. And I will tell you the story why we're studying them. And it's a new class of channel. We haven't talked about them. So TRP channels, they're, of course, pretty famous, I think. A lot of people specifically focus on one of them. And they involved in a lot of physiological and pathophysiological processes. And of course, we have a lot of papers on the ion channels. We have 28 homologs. But I would say the TRPV subfamily has been always very popular because of the TRPV1 channel. So Nobel Prize was given in 2021. And TRPV1 is quite an interesting channel. We know that it's involved in pain sensation. It has very good pharmacology, capsaicin, ricinophenotoxin. It has blockers and has the inhibitors. But the other channels, I would say, in many ways were subcloned, characterized. Some of them were called thermotrip channels. We have 4, 1 to 4. And I would say very little we know what exactly do they do based on a lot of literature that we have now. And we have another 2 subtype, V2 and V5 and V6. Sorry, yeah, I don't, oh, it's start working, hold on. Can you guys see it? Yeah. So those are epithelial channels, they're calcium-specific channels, and my lab works on them, but that's not the talk going to be not about those channels. I will focus on the one of the channels that I actually really like, and I always call it a poor brother of a very rich family brother. I think it's TRPV1, because when everybody was working on TRPV1, somehow we decided to look at TRPV2, and that's going to be the story of today. And so you would ask why TRPV2, and I will give a little bit of history and tell you what we're doing with it and how is it going, I guess. So Mike Katerina, when he was in David Julius' lab, right, in 1997 was the TRPV1 paper. In 1999, it became the second paper where the TRPV2 was discovered and cloned. And at the same time, the second paper was published simultaneously, and the two sort of stories did not really align, right? So one was claiming that it was a temperature sensor, the other group was claiming that it was sort of calcium permeable channel that translocates in the cells, but it was not really clear what it's doing. And as you would be not surprised, right, as I said, all the attention was given to the richer brother. The next paper actually that sort of made the field came out in 2011, again from Mike Katerina, when he created a sort of knockout mice, what some people question what this mice is really is it real knockout, that majority of the mice actually were dead, so they were perinatally lethal. And the normal, the ones that survived, they basically had no thermal, mechanical, nociception defects. So this idea was in the field that this TRPV2 channel has nothing to do with the temperature sensation, mechanosensation, but that's the only knockout that actually has a phenotype that they're perinatally lethal. And the time passed, in 2022, I cannot cite all the papers in this sort of category here, but I'm basically highlighting that the channel actually expressed in every cell type and compared to other TRP channels. And it's actually been a lot of literature suggesting that it's involved in a lot of physiological process. But the bigger picture is here, while it's a lot of suggestions and a lot of papers, we really don't know what exactly it does. And my lab actually focused on understanding this channel in neuronal development and sort of brain cancer, but with the idea is that we're structural biologists, I guess, by training. We do like to solve the structures, but the picture became much more clear that way. I think, having in our hands pure channel, maybe we could advance and understand the channel at every level. Here, in 20 minutes, I could only cover the pharmacology, what we call it structural pharmacology using cryo-EM, but the lab is basically focusing on all these aspects now. And what we know from the literature is that TRPV channel possibly modulated by lipids, possibly modulated by endogenous modulators, for example, phosphorylation by ERK, and maybe involved in ROS signaling. But from the synthetic pharmacology, it's quite interesting. So the only 2 activators that we have is cannabidiol and 2-ABP, and I'm in front of ion channel group, so you know that cannabidiol could affect other ion channels, 2-ABP could be activated on inhibiting other channels. And in terms of the inhibitors or blockers, we have ruthenium red, what ruthenium red blocks pretty much every channel. And we have the peppermidine, I will mention about it, that one of my collaborators found. So the pharmacology dirty, we don't know anything. And using this pharmacology to understand molecular sort of function of this channel, what it exactly does, it's actually not that easy using those, I guess, ligands. So what we decide to do is to solve the structures, and by basically arguing with ourselves, if we know every binding site, maybe we could get to some drugs. So first I'm going to introduce you to the structure of the channel, just that we're all on the same page. Like all the sodium and calcium channels, some potassium channels, this is 6-transmembrane domain. We have N and C termini, and what the TRPV subfamily is known for, and as other TRP channels is known for, they have anchoring repeats. And they make actually this very nice, I call it like a skirt, so all the TRPV channel have the transmembrane domain, cute skirt, that actually involved in sort of gating of the channel. And like all the ion channels, obviously it has a pore, it has a selectivity filter, and it has low gate. And now we're going to be looking basically at all the structures of the channel and try to figure out how those compounds activate or inhibit the channel, and what can we get this information, how can we use it. So the first thing we do, and this is for all structural biologists, right? We purify the channels. These days we reconstitute them into nanodiscs, right? And nanodiscs arguably probably the best thing in the structural biology for membrane protein, because it supposedly mimics the plasma membrane of the where the channels usually are. So, and the surprise of cryo-EM is that yesterday what was already mentioned, that you take one drop, you get more than one structure. And that's exactly what has happened to us. So this is just the structure, what we call it in membrane. So can I call it, it's an apostate of the channel? Probably not. I could call it as a channel reconstituted in nanodiscs, and that's what we got. We got the structure of the channel, what we call it apostate 1 and apostate 2, and that's the view from the top of the selectivity filter. One of it very shut closed, and then the other one is actually pretty quite open. And if we now look through the side view, again, this is just the diameter of the tetramer, the state 1 was very much closed, so none of the calcium could ever go through the channel. So, and the other channel was on the gate, it was actually pretty closed. But the selectivity filter actually floppy. And we actually was one of the first one in 2019 to show that in a closed state, when you reconstitute the TRP channels, seems like they are selectivity filter actually not the gate. It's actually a floppy sort of structure that undergoes spontaneous conformation in the cell. Now it's been seen in TRPV3 channel, it's been seen now in TRPM8. And so this seems like a consistent sort of observation in structural biology, and I will mention in a minute, Kent and Schwartz also did electrophysiological study and sort of confirm our observation, or we confirm his, that seems like the selectivity filter is quite dynamic. So we also see so we try to explain why we see it originally. So we do see spontaneous activation of this channel when we reconstitute into proteoliposomes. We also see that if we reconstitute the channel into the membranes, so this is high-speed AFM done together with the Simon Schuring here in Cornell Med, that you could see TRP channels actually when they are in a membrane put under high-speed AFM, they actually moves a lot. So this movement of the channels in the apostate, when we have them in membranes, obviously they undergo spontaneous motion. And I mean, again, it's sort of known phenomenon, right? So this is from the eLife paper in 2019 from Kent and Schwartz, that the idea is that the selectivity filter, even without the stimulation, maybe undergoes some conformation. And, you know, we always have close to open states conformation. So our data just without any drug sort of confirm what was sort of now new suggestion about the behavior of the TRP channels. So we move on next. We first wanted to try to see if we find CBD binding site, and can we use this binding site to sort of design the next possible more selective activator of the channel. So again, it's the same principle, right? So you take CBD, you apply to the channel, solve the structure, and if you're lucky enough and your drug interact with the channel, you will see where it binds. So we saw the CBD binding site. You cannot miss it. Actually, we repeat this experiments many times in structural biology, because you will see we've done it with other in combination with other drugs. So the CBD binding site is quite unique originally that we thought for the TRPV channels, but recently the sodium channel structure came out and show exactly the same location of the CBD in a sodium channel. So it's an interface of the two subunits right here, sort of between two subunits S6 of one subunit and S5 of another subunit. The interaction of itself facilitated by a lot of hydrophobic residues. And if we compare that to the other channels, TRPV1, TRPV3, TRPV4, they actually also maintain some of those residues. And actually CBD is known to be not only activator, much more high activating the TRPV2, but it also could activate TRPV1. And to our surprise, though, we of course hoped to solve the structure of the open channel because we would want the conformation in the presence of the ligand to sort of see how this binding pocket is changed and channel is changed to design new compounds, but we actually didn't get that. We got the structure of the compound binding site, but we actually got the channel that moves very little. We also noted that when we compare the apo state of the structure and to the structure in a blue with the CBD bound state, again, as I said, the movements was quite minimal, but the most movements were observed is that, I told you about that nice skirt that the TRPV channels have, that it was pushed down very much at a quite big distance, 4.6 angstrom, and the interesting conformation happened on the N and C termini, when it's basically happened an exchange here of the C terminus wrapping around this beta sheet and almost situation of like putting this anchoring repeats down. So originally, actually, before the next data that I'm going to show to you, we actually didn't know how to explain what kind of state we solved. And we just basically left it at CBD-bound state. What kind of state this channel is, we actually couldn't explain. And the other thing we also did in collaboration with Andreas Levner is that we tested on single channels how often do we see opening of the channel with the CBD versus the other compound, 2-ABP. And as you could see here, the openings are quite rare, they're short, and with cryo-EM, when you apply the drugs, you freeze very fast. It sort of wasn't self-explanatory. Maybe we're not seeing any opening because we just cannot catch them in the cryo-EM, or who knows, maybe here we're seeing some sort of inactivated state, desensitized state, because we're catching sort of that part. But 2-ABP gave in single channels recording quite a lot of openings, and of course the next step was, why don't we go and try to see the structure with 2-ABP? And this is where it's really got interesting, and power of cryo-EM is amazing. And I don't think so I have to sell any of this here, but this is just two cryo-EM structures aligned on one grid. So you could just take your EM structures, align them, and even here you already could see all the movement the channel undergoes when you apply the drug. And from this data, we were able to extract two states that we were more interested in, obviously, is the one that we call the activated state and inactivated state. We were able actually pinpoint exactly where the 2-ABP binds, and it binds in this interesting pocket again. This is very new and unique to specifically to TRPV2, that it binds actually from almost opposite side where the CBD binds, so it binds here, and it's interact with this pocket, sort of outside pocket, I would call it. And this histidine seems like makes the connection 521 with the 2-ABP molecules. And obviously we don't see that in the apo state structure. But so we mutate this site again in collaboration with Andreas Levner, and we were able to show that the histidine 521 and arginine 539 seems like involved in the binding of this compound to the channel. And we were very happy that we were able to shift all this interaction using those mutagenesis. And when we also were very happy that we finally solved the structure of the open state. And from this data, all the data that we had already in the lab, some published, some not published, start making sense. So the channel actually exists in this, what we call it, activated or apo state, and this C termini actually in the alpha helical conformation, and the other N-terminus of the channel on the other subunit in this sort of, I call it sort of a loopy-like structure over here. And so when you activate the channel goes several conformations here. I'm just going to focus on the skirt first. First to open, it also has this S4, S5 linker interacts with the S6 linker. This histidine interacts with the lysine and form this pi interaction. Channel basically opens in a lower gate. And here you could see that the inactivated state, the alpha helical structure of the C-terminus still there. So the channel opens, this conformation doesn't change, but when we inactivate the channel is closed. And this is where the C-terminus wraps around this beta sheets and bring the channel down closed. And actually, it's more interesting to see, and I showed the movie, is that the channel, actually, the skirt behaves as like your camera, sort of this iris, goes back and forth motion of 7 angstrom this way or 7 angstrom this way, depends if you activate the channel or inactivate the channel. The drug actually wedges between two subunits. This is part of subunit 1, this is part of subunit 2, and basically that motion with the rotation opens the channel. If you inactivate the channel, the drug is still there, but the channel with the movement of this alpha, this alpha helical thing that goes and wraps around, it's represented as here, basically pull all these anchoring repeats down and sort of squish the channel back to close it. And so now this is the conformation that we also saw at the CBD binding state. And so now we could basically clearly say that the only activated state that we got so far is in the present 2-ABP. Both states in CBD and the second state that we got in 2-ABP could be explained as the desensitized or inactivated state of the channel. So this is sort of the movie, and again, you already saw this from MEM. 2-ABP comes in, the channel sort of, it's wedges, the channel rotates, puts the anchoring repeats down, and that's in an activated state. So, of course, we were challenging even ourselves because we wanted to make sure that 2-ABP binding site we found correctly, CBD binding site we found correctly, but also Andreas made an observation in his laboratory that actually if you apply 2-ABP by itself, the currents are very small, but if you pre-prime the channel with CBD, basically the channel gets, 2-ABP response gets potentiated. We also hoped for a much more open channel. Maybe those two drugs will give us something, bigger channel opening. What we got actually was very nice and self-explanatory. Both drugs binds on the sides of this S4, S5 linker. What is in TRP channel is known to be the major gear sort of function of the opening and closing the channel. We see both density, we see both drugs, and the conformation is pretty much the same, suggesting that actually 2-ABP is the major drug that actually opens the channel and drives this conformation. Somehow the CBD pre-primes it by going into this. It's a good word, I guess. We know this is everybody using it as sort of like a fenestration, and maybe it's some lipids there when we have it in a channel in the native form, and we don't know exactly what is the endogenous modulation to open this channel. So we also saw a lipid in the vanilloid binding pocket. We see that that lipid that was presented here sort of moves out of the vanilloid binding pocket and 2-ABP moves in. And again, because the channel has to rotate in this sort of part of the channel, again, it makes sense if the lipid that sits in vanilloid binding pocket with all this rotation gets excreted because the drug has to come in. So we, again, were very happy with the second binding site that we found, and in this case, the channel was moving. Of course, we want to use these both binding sites to figure out if we could get activators. The next question we, of course, ask ourselves, how the inhibitors or blockers work with this channel, or where do they bind, and how the overall conformation happens. So first, we use ruthenium red. It has not been seen in the TRPV1 to TRPV4 channel, how the ruthenium red blocks the channel. So we worked with it for a while. We naively thought that we just add ruthenium red to the channel that is not activated, we maybe see the drug. We actually couldn't until we basically used 2-ABP as an activator and used the blocker afterwards. And we were able to see the ruthenium red very nicely bound into the pore of the channel, keeping it as open as we see in our activated state. We see much better resolved structure of the 2-ABP because now the channel is really nicely blocked. And here, the representation of the pores that you just saw, right, from apo to blocked, the major interesting part is that the top of the channel, right, activated with 2-ABP, activated with 2-ABP, basically gets very nicely the density of ruthenium red fit exactly into the pore, but the channel is closed because some of the conformation here in the pore move the S6 for the gate to close. And again, why we could sort of propose what kind of state we are solving it, this actually channel shows you the activated blocked basically structure, because it's basically the C-terminus stay in the same conformation as in an activated state, and exactly how it was proposed in electrophysiology. Can we use this site for the drug design? We don't know yet, but that was very gratifying that we were able to solve ruthenium red and very nice density for 2-ABP, and of course that site is now much better resolved that we are also, I guess, like I said, using for the drug design. So how do we got to glioblastoma and why is it became one of the priorities also in the lab is that Goncalo Bernardes in Cambridge is a chemical biologist that used actually a compound database to search sort of by using computational approaches and machine learning compounds that was shown to interact with the TRP channels overall. And what they were able to find, that this compound in Indian long pepper called pepper longlumin possibly inhibits several ion channels. And they contacted us, basically it's V2, A1, and C7. They contacted us with the idea if we could solve this channel structure and get sort of confirmation where the, pepper longlumin binds, and also show the mechanism. So we collaborated on this project and was able to show that the pepper longlumin binds actually in the pocket slightly above of 2-ABP pocket and sort of glues those S5, S6, and S4-5 linker together, not allowing the channel to move. So it basically makes the channel in a super desensitized, inactivated state that the channel cannot come out of it. And so here is the 2-ABP usually binds over here, pepper longlumin binds a little bit higher. But again, gluing all these two things, basically all these two subunits together, it's not allowing the channel to come out of this desensitized state. They also went and did interesting data with the mice that developed tumors. They actually developed this hydrogel that was perfused with the pepper longlumin. They were able to sort of show that the tumors were shrinking. Based on this data, they form a company and they are trying to see if they could do this in clinical trials, because glioblastoma patients basically don't have a chance. They have 10 to 12 months maximum to live. And the idea is that maybe those hydrogels could be applied after the tumor extraction in some of those patients. And that's the method, that's the summary of what we found. And of course, where we're going with all of this is a long haul process. We're very much interested we found all the binding site. I think we covered all of them, what we know right now for TRPV2. So the next idea is that, like everybody else, or people who presented here, structure-based drug design is probably the way to go because we have several binding sites. Vsevolod Kaltridge at the University of South California, together with the company, and in Ukraine, developed a method. Seva developed a method of, they have 30 billion compounds that could be computationally tested against any binding site. So we actually now have our hundreds best that we are testing, and we already tested. But Brian Roth's lab at UNC, University of North Carolina, has a very big drug discovery center related to GPCR's discovery of the different compounds, and he was very nice to me, allowing me to go and screen compounds in his place because it's basically NIH funded and I could do it for minimum amount of money. This part cost a lot of money. And so we actually screen a lot of compounds. We also have the list. And so as you could see, the next steps for this project is basically find the compounds, solve the structure, make them better, and hopefully they would be partially specific because not 2-ABP side, not CBD side. CBD side maybe not as specific, but 2-ABP sites for us and pepper longlumin side is the two sites that has not been seen in the other TRP channels. So we hope that would be our sites. And at this stage I will stop, and I don't do anything on myself except interacting with the great group of people that in my lab and all the collaborators that listed here involved in these projects and other projects that we do in the lab. Thank you very much.
Nice talk. In terms of the open structure where you have the selectivity filter kind of opened up like that, how does selectivity work in that instance?
So the TRP channels are non-selective calcium channel. We all sort of don't understand why is we seeing these wide open pores? We see them much more organized, if you want to call it, when we apply the drugs. But in these specific states, when we just reconstitute them in nanodiscs, and what we call them closed states and apostates, we see this fluctuation of the flexibility. So maybe we're just catching one specific state when they're moving. But at this stage, they're closed, right? So only the drugs is sort of organize them. So we don't, not in TRPM8, not in TRPV2, not in TRPV3, we kind of have an explanation. They are pretty wide. TRP channels don't known, right, for allowing a very big organic molecules going through that filter. So maybe that has something to do with it. And so that's the flexibility that comes for that.
Do you find densities for other things in
ions or the other things that we tried? So when the pores are organized, we see, we can't, I think David Stokes said, we cannot ever said what it is, water ions, so we do see it, right? And I'm not showing there because I don't want to get in trouble when I'm in front of the EM people. But yes, we do, and we tried some other compounds. For example, it's been proposed that TRPV2 are allowed doxorubicin to go inside of the cell, and some people propose to use TRPV2 as the delivery mechanism to the glioblastoma, doxorubicin for the patient, and we do see doxorubicin locked in the gain, the same as we saw with ruthenium red. So yes.
Thank you very much.